Welcome to Kicks and Minivans, the podcast for dads, especially the ones that love sneakers. I'm your host, KG, and however you're tuning in, you could be doing anything right now. So the fact that you're hanging now, that means a whole lot. Well, we're joined this episode by not one, but two different guests. The first is my beautiful wife, Becky. She's coming on. We're just doing a little fun thing we've seen going around on TikTok where people are doing these drafts. So we're just doing a little Christmas draft. Now that we're into December, I started playing Christmas music November 1st, but not everyone's with that, right? So now that we're into December, we're doing a Christmas draft. And basically, we're just taking turns drafting our 5 favorite things about Christmas and just putting our list together like that. But as we get into the meat of the episode, I'm joined by my friend Nate Branam, and you're going to hear from him. And one of the things that I talked about in the very first episode of Kicks and Minivans was taking care of yourself. Because I don't think you could really take care of your family unless you're taking care of yourself. You can't keep on pouring from the cup unless that cup's getting filled up. And Nate has a specific insight through his coaching where he helps people discover and be the healthiest version of themselves. And so I'm super excited. This is such a rich and deep conversation. So much that I feel like I was learning so much as I was interviewing him, and I hope you do too. Let's dive in. And it's always ladies first, so first pick of the draft is yours.
I'm going to go A Quiet Snowfall on Christmas morning.
Did not see that coming for the number one overall.
Yeah.
All right.
Christmas is different when it's all white.
This is true. There's nothing like a white Christmas. I'll give you that. However, the first overall, I cannot believe you did not take The Birth of Our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Your parents are going to watch this. And I know you're an adult, but you still want them to be proud of you. So I'm going to take The Birth of Jesus as the number one overall pick.
Missed opportunity.
I'm just saying, it's called a Christmas for a reason.
Well, number 2, I'm going to go with decorating.
Decorating. That was not even on my board. I mean, like...
How does it feel like Christmas if it's not decorated?
I mean, it's nice, but like... number 2 overall?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll go with presents. Christmas is looking pretty strong.
Not everyone might agree with me on this one, but a peppermint mocha in a Christmas mug.
Peppermint mocha was on my board. That's a really solid pick. Number 3, this is a great pick right here. I'm very excited about this. Christmas Eve night. There is no more magical time of the year than Christmas Eve night. It almost beats Christmas morning. Just the anticipation almost trumps Christmas morning itself.
All right. I'm going to go with
number 4.
Walking Through Christmas Lights.
Walking Through Christmas Lights. We had very different lists. I'll give you that. I did have lights on my board. So I feel like I can't take that. So that's a good pick. I am going to go, and I cannot believe this wasn't said yet, but number 4, incredible value at the 4 spot. The greatest Christmas movie of all time, even beating out the second greatest Christmas movie, Die Hard. Give me Elf.
Yes.
Give me Elf at number 4. My list is almost complete.
5. What is Christmas without Christmas music?
Oh, I cannot believe it fell to number 5. I can't. That's a steal. That's a steal at 5 right there. I should have taken it. But I'm going to go with the last pick. The week between Christmas and New Year. It's like one of the chillest weeks of the entire year. Right there. I'm taking that for my 5th pick.
Ring in there!
All right, Nate. Welcome to Kicks and Minivans. Thanks for joining us today, man.
Thanks, Kevin. I am so glad to be here.
Hey, well, start us off. Tell us a little bit about you, your wife, your kids. Give us a little snapshot of your family.
Yeah. Well, I am blessed to be married to my high school sweetheart. My wife and I met as juniors and then started dating as seniors in high school. And we're kind of one of those rare stories. We've been married for 20 years now, which is just kind of incredible to think about. Actually, it just feels like yesterday we were back in high school. But yeah, we've been married for 20 years, and we have four great kids. We have a
Four.
son who he's in college now, which is just again another mind-blowing thing. And then
Mm.
I've got two high school daughters, and then a little caboose baby daughter that is four. So we have quite
You
the
have the
range
whole
in our house.
spectrum, the whole spectrum
Yes.
taken care of right there. That's
Yeah.
amazing, man. And so we met the first time I was visiting the church that you worked at.
Hmm.
I saw you in a pair of J's. And so anytime I see someone in a cool pair of sneakers, it's like an automatic invitation to like be friends, right? So I came over, I introduced myself. So you're a sneakerhead. That's how we got connected. Tell
Yep.
us, I got to know, what is your favorite pair of sneakers that you own in your collection?
Well, I had to put them on for the episode,
Yes.
so I'm gonna lift them up for the camera here. They are my Jordan 1
Ah.
Turbo Greens. I got them retail, and it's a pretty cool story where I missed out on sneakers but stumbled upon them at a store, and so was just super stoked about that. Love them. My favorite pair by far.
Dude, that is one of my grails. That is on my dream list of sneakers I don't own, but I
Is
wish
it?
I had. That's
Oh man, I'm
it's a
surprised you don't
gorgeous
have it.
pair, man. I don't, I got the Hyper Royal ones. I ended up hitting that
Yes.
on sneakers. That was my first ever win on sneakers. And so to me, it's like they were kind of similar enough where I was like, all right, the resell on the turbos is a little high. So I was like, I'll chill on those for a little bit, but maybe
Yeah.
one day. Maybe
Yeah.
one day. All right. So speaking of like dream pairs, grail pairs,
Yeah.
if you could have any other pair that you don't own yet, but you could add any pair regardless of price into your collection, what would it be?
Man, it's really hard to narrow it down to one. There's just so many that come to mind, but I think probably the one that would be at the top of the list would be the Tiffany Dunks. Those are just incredibly awesome looking. I love anything that's Tiffany that Nike puts out. And so, yeah, that would probably
can't
be
go
the
wrong.
top of the list.
You can't go wrong with
Yeah,
those
yeah.
colors, man. Like you
They-
really can't.
They're so good. Black, white, and you got Tiffany. It's classic.
Yeah, I can't fault you for that one. That's be a great pair to add to any collection. All right. Well, I mentioned that, I first met you, I was at church. You were working at that church. So give us a little bit of your professional background. We don't need like the entire thing, but like enough to kind of get us up to speed. Like give us a little bit of your professional background.
Yeah. Well, I started my career as a youth pastor because I loved pouring into the next generation and really being able to walk with teenagers, which is, the craziest, wildest season of everyone's life. It's also where a lot of our identity is formed. So I really enjoyed walking through that with people. And as a youth pastor, I began to notice this passion within me for leadership and helping others to reach their full potential. And that passion led me to become a learner of leadership. And so I kind of am a nerd about all things leadership. And with that, I began to apply it and got more and more opportunities to lead at a higher level professionally. And then eventually was able to lead as an executive leader in one of the largest churches in America, which is where we had met. I was working and happened to be at the campus that you attend. And yeah, you saw my shoes, I saw your shoes, and man, and our friendship blossomed from there, man. But I knew that years ago, my end goal was to be a leadership coach and consultant, because I really saw myself as more of like an Obi-Wan Kenobi character and not Luke Skywalker himself. Because I love pouring into other people and helping them reach their full potential. So a few months ago, I took the plunge and I began my own company, which is called N8Solutions. And we do leadership coaching, consulting, and leadership searches.
That's amazing. I love the Obi-Wan versus Luke comparison, right? My last church I worked at, we had the language of hero maker. that not everyone in their life will have a chance to be a hero, but everyone can be a hero maker.
Yeah.
Because for every Batman, there's an Alfred. For every Luke, there's an Obi-Wan.
100%.
And so I think everybody
100%.
has the potential, the opportunities to be a hero maker in the life of somebody else. So I love that language that you used. And I want to tap into some of your experiences in leadership, because I think there's a lot that we could gain from that. But let me ask you this first. You're a youth pastor. You were a youth pastor for a lot of years, and you have teenagers, one in college now. How different was it raising your own teenagers versus pastoring other kids' teenagers? Right? Because I was a children's pastor for 8 years, and now I have children. And I'm like, I feel like it's two completely different worlds now that I'm sitting on this side of it.
100%. It is so much different when they are in your house, because when you're like a youth pastor, you are objective. You're an objective person in whatever situation you're trying to like lead them through, right? So you get to walk away and you get to go home and you get to go, well, I hope they make the right decision, you know, like that's what you get to do. But when you are living with that person, they're part of your family and you're so emotionally invested, that subjectivity makes it so hard. And so it's been way different. And I got to be honest with you, Kevin, there's been so many things as a parent of teenagers that I have had to say to certain people, and a lot of times it's to my wife. I'll say like, man, I feel bad for all the parents that I tried to coach through this, because I had no idea what this was like until I actually was in it, because it is way different. But the good news is, I mean, it helps a little bit. You kind of know like what things to look out for, you know, since that's your background. You kind of have all the bad stories that you get to scare your kids with a little bit as you are parenting them. Learn from this mistake that this person made. You know, you get to tell those stories. But man, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. And I think like that's where the hero maker can really come in handy too, is, you know, for those youth and kids pastors that don't have kids of their own right now, I think it just makes it that much more vital to have, you know, someone like you in their corner that's been on both sides of the fence, right? Like you've been the youth pastor and you've been the parent. And so, you know, I know as, you know, I spent 8 years without kids of my own, but pastoring other people's kids, that I didn't always have that Obi-Wan in my ear kind of directing me, man. So it's like, hey, for any of the youth pastors out there that you don't have kids, man, it's like, get an Obi-Wan in your corner that could give you that wisdom from being on both sides.
100%. It's so important, I think, for kids to have the Obi-Wans, you know, that their youth pastors, teachers, other adults that are in their life. I mean, the data shows that that's really important to helping faith stick in, you know, youth ministry language. And, you know, I think parents need it too. Parents need those people that are in their corner, that are cheering them on, that are helping them. And I think a lot of parents, we kind of get stuck in those situations where we're like, I don't know what to do. And so, you know, it's either we take a stab at it, or we don't do anything at all. Like, and because we're just fearful we're going to mess it up. You know, it's like as an example of this for me as a dad, I had this vision when my son kind of came to the teenage years that I wanted to kind of chart a course of manhood for him. And so I wanted to do this like whole big conversation centered around a trip that we did together. Like I had this vision, but I didn't know how to do that because nobody did that for me. And so it was one of those things where I didn't do anything, honestly, Kevin, for a year. I just like sat on it. It was like, you know, a year passed and I was like, I don't know what to do. So I just did nothing. And so I finally kind of was like, all right, this is unacceptable. And so I went and I asked a couple guys that I knew had done that with their sons. And after 2 conversations, I was like, oh, I can do this. And I did it. Yeah. And that is a conversation. He's 19 now. Like we go back to that conversation where we were sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon, actually. And that's been a pivotal
it's a good place
in his life. Yeah,
it's a good place to have a conversation. For sure. Well, I will be calling you up in about 10 years when I'm needing to have that conversation with my kids. Because
Sounds
I think
good. Look forward to
I
that.
do, man. I think that's so important, and I think it's going to tie into the rest of what we're going to chat about. But you mentioned you do a lot of leadership coaching,
Hmm.
and so you put a big emphasis in that on individual health,
Hmm.
right? Which I think we should know, like, leaders should be healthy, and I think we all know what an unhealthy leader can look and feel like,
Yes.
right? But why do you think most people? I feel like just in our world, like a lot of people just coast when it comes to being healthy
Yeah.
individually. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think a lot of people coast because, several reasons. There's other things that are, one of those is there's other things that seem to be more flashy,
Hmm.
to kind of go after. And so we go after those kind of like those external things that look like we're healthy, but we're not actually maybe really healthy inside. And so we chase those things. We chase the
Mm.
appearance of health, and we want that over actually doing, focusing on our internal health. Because that leads me to the second reason. Working on our internal health is hard. I mean, it
Yeah.
isn't easy. It's not easy to have to work on, improving ourselves or getting well if we're not well. We have to do some hard work. We have to have some hard conversations. And it doesn't happen, overnight. It's like, if you want to get ripped, you can't go to the gym one day and expect to be
Right.
ripped. You have to build a consistent rhythm of going to the gym. You have to eat right. You have to hydrate well. I mean, there's just so many things. And then you have to wait for the
Yeah.
results. So I think a lot of people don't prioritize it because there's other things they're chasing that they think are going to give them faster results, or that, appearance of health.
Mm. I love the way you say that, the appearance. And we know, like, Instagram is mostly fake, right? Like,
Oh,
Instagram is
100%.
everyone's highlight reel. And it's like, and I'm addicted
Yes.
to Instagram. I'm on it way too much, right? But it's everyone's highlight reel. And so we can make it easy to appear that we're in a healthy spot, even though we might
Yes.
not be. All right, so I think too, like, when we think about being healthy, a lot of times we think about it just in terms of being not sick. And I think,
Hmm.
we've reached a point in society where we could add mental health into that as well. When we talk about being healthy, I think, like, people would
Yeah.
say, like, hey, I'm also mentally healthy, or I'm mentally
Yes.
not healthy right now. But you take it even further than that. When we were chatting, you talked about 6 domains of health,
Hmm.
which sounds
Hmm.
like a little overwhelming, but as we were talking, like, they just seem so interconnected to me. So run
Yes.
us through that real quick. Run us through the 6 domains.
Yeah, yeah. So the six domains of health are your physical health, which, we've already touched a little bit on, and the mental health, which is, it's so good that now as a society that we are kind of reducing that stigma and we're talking about mental health,
Hmm.
which is so important, especially in this post-COVID climate that we're all in. I think it's really brought to the forefront the need for us to talk about it. But the other four are our emotional health, which is really just feeling and managing all of our range of emotions. And it's understanding what our emotions are telling us. So kind of looking
Mm.
at our emotions as a dashboard that are telling us, the car dashboard, that a light comes on and that light tells us something about what's happening with our car. Like, I need to put oil in, or something like that, or the engine's overheating. Those are all important things for us to know. And our emotional health is really important for us to understand our emotions and what they're telling us. So that's the third one. The fourth one is our spiritual health. And that has to do with our relationship with God, our relationship with ourselves, and then our relationships with the community that really helps us to reinforce who we are, our identity. And then the fifth one is our relational health, which is all about having good relationships, having healthy boundaries put up so that we maintain healthy relationships, that we address conflict in a healthy way, we have a fulfilling social life, and that our relational needs are actually being met, because each of us have relational needs that need to be met. And then that last one is our vocational health. And with our vocational health, it's all about understanding what our unique calling is and understanding how what we do for work, and that could be like a job, that could be something else that we do for work, but it's understanding how that links to your calling. And it's all
Mm.
about finding fulfillment in your work and that you are in a work environment that fits you. Everybody has different work environments that fits them. There's kind of really no one size fits all. There's some things that are toxic, probably for everybody, but some people like they want to work from home, and that's what really seems to fit them. Other people are like, I could never work from home because I feel so isolated from everybody. Those are generally the extroverts. But those are the 6 domains of health: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, relational, and vocational.
That's so good. And you can see right away like how some of those are connected, right? But like how deeply connected are they, right? Like, so say you're doing well in 4 of those areas, but in 2 you're really suffering. Like, how much would the bleeding in 2 impact the other 4 if the other 4 are going well? Or is it possible for like the other 4 to be going well if you're really struggling in 2 of them per se?
Yeah. Yeah, it is all interconnected. It definitely is all interconnected. And so, if you are suffering or you're maybe deficient in 2 areas of your health, but the other 4 are looking good, well, the other 4 are going to be impacted over time. And so let me just kind of give you an example just from myself to kind of like paint this picture really well. So I've got I got something wrong with my left knee, and I don't know what it is. I've tried to get it looked at. Doctors haven't really been able to diagnose what it is, but I've got kind of like pain in my left knee at all times. And what I've noticed that over the last, year or 2 that I've been experiencing this is that it's impacted how I walk. And so probably most people don't notice it, but obviously I notice it because it's how I walk.
Sure.
And what I've noticed is that recently I've started to get some pain in my right foot because I'm walking different because of the pain in my left knee. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I really got to get to the bottom of what's going on with my knee because that's causing the pain in my right foot. So
it's overcompensating.
It will bleed. Exactly. And so that's what happens with our holistic health is that it is eventually going to bleed into the other areas. So if you're working like in a job that you hate, so your vocational health is obviously not going to be good in that type of situation. And it's going to bleed into your other areas. You're going to start to have this like mental thought life where you are talking to yourself all the time about, very negatively about your work, about maybe your performance, about the people that you work with. And so that thought life is going to lead to emotional tank. You're going to start feeling anxious, especially when you get that Sunday scaries. It's like Sunday evening and you're like, oh man, I got to go back to work tomorrow. You start to feel that really bubble up in you. And then that impacts your relationships because you're going to start treating people at work terrible. You're going to come home just so exhausted and burnt out. And you're going to treat your family and your kids. You're going to yell at them. And then guess what? When you try to go to bed at night, you're going to sleep terrible because you're just going to be ruminating about all of the things that happened that day that you hated. And you're going to be thinking about how you're going to have to get up and do it the next day. So it really does bleed into all parts of our health. And so it's important for us to understand how they're all interconnected, but also understand that we need to kind of like when we're not well and we need to focus on getting well, that we've got to look at it from all the angles, not just assume that the only thing I need to do is get a new job, because you're going to have to look at how that has bled into the other areas of your health so that you can improve your whole self, not just your vocational health.
And I love how you said at the beginning, you said over time, right? Yeah. Like you might not notice the overcome, like your right foot didn't start hurting the day the day your knee impacted your walking,
No.
right? It was over time.
Yep.
And I can totally, just as you were saying that, like I could just think of multiple examples from my own life where that was the case, right? All right, but I want to ask about a couple of these things, right? Because there's 6 domains. Some of them almost like mental and emotional health. And I like a little bit about how you describe the emotional health as like a dashboard, and almost talking about responding versus reacting to our emotions when we see them, right? But I think at least me, I could sometimes think emotional health and mental health are pretty close to the same thing. Like how are they different? Because obviously you think they're different if they're 2 of the 6 domains. They're not one combined. How would you describe the difference of those 2?
Yep. Well, they're very much connected, for sure. I mean, the link is very clear with those 2, whereas it might be a little bit more fuzzy for like vocational and mental or something like that. But the mental health is more about our thought life and our beliefs. So that's really what you're trying to control. You're trying to maintain control of the thoughts that you have. Like we can't control the thoughts that pop into our mind, but we can control if we give that thought attention, if we give that thought, the ability to just run wild in our minds. So it's really about the thought life and forming the appropriate beliefs, because everything else just really flows out of that. The emotional health is more about understanding and feeling your emotions, because our emotions, like we said before, are the dashboard. And there's a whole bunch of people that have decided that they're going to like close down certain emotions. And I think, as we think about like dudes, particularly guys, there's this whole thing about like, well, guys don't cry, it's like, hold up a minute. Like you're just shutting down a whole emotion within you. We need to feel those emotions because those emotions are telling us something, but it is definitely those 2 are linked together. So the way that our minds work psychologically is that if we think in 3 levels. We think cognitively first. That's more of the mental side of things. This is where we form beliefs in our head. And then we think secondly at an emotional level. So based on those thoughts or beliefs, we feel an emotion. Okay, so this is the emotional side of it. But then there's a third piece that is the volitional, which is how we then act off of that emotion. So to give you an example of how this plays out, because oftentimes this happens so quickly within our minds, we can't even really see that progression play out. So, let's say that you're somebody that was told as a kid that, you're just always getting hurt. And so they just say like, oh, you're clumsy. And so you form this belief in your mind because of all these experiences of you like getting hurt or falling and all these people like giving you a hard time and teasing you about being clumsy. You form this belief that I'm just a clumsy person. Okay. So there's a belief there. But then emotionally, let's say then, you're just walking down the street and you are just walking, there's all these people around you and you catch your foot on the pavement and you fall down. Well, because of that belief, how you feel emotionally is probably going to be a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment. You're going to probably, kind of overreact to that based on that belief. And then you're going to volitionally, you're like, well, that's it. I'm just not walking down the street anymore. So you try to control like the situations, you avoid things or you try to engage with certain things to then control the situation so you don't do that again because you don't like that feeling. So that's how we kind of work, how our mind works psychologically. And so really with our health, we are trying to figure out, okay, let's figure out what our thought life looks like. Let's figure out what our emotional life looks like, and then how those 2 work together because they're going to impact us volitionally. And that's what we want to really try to control. This is where you have, the bosses that just like blow up at their staff, like you talk about those toxic bosses, or maybe a dad that blows up on his kids. Well, that's gotten to the volitional point. but you've got to kind of backtrack it to try to figure out, okay, what's going on emotionally there, and then what's going on mentally there. So that hopefully gives you a little bit more distinction on the difference between the two.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting. And, when you talk about like, well, we're told boys don't cry, right? Yeah. So then it's like, and maybe like I'm the last one on earth to put this together, but I'm like, is this why men are so angry all the time? Like, maybe this is like, I might be the last one to put this together. It's like, for me at least, it's like I can lose my temper. I know that. Mm-hmm. And often I've been told to not show my emotions, and so I bottle them up. And then it's like I reach a point where it's like, man, my face can't hide it, like, and if I'm in the room, like you just know I'm mad. Even if I'm not saying anything, I'm not, it's just like I bottle it up. And so now I'm like, I feel like I'm like learning 30 years of self-thing in a second here. This is deep for KG on this episode. So it's like,
well, you're really onto something though, because I do think that, for guys, it does oftentimes come out as anger, and we say like, I'm angry, like if we verbalize it, and many times it's just obvious to everybody, like you were saying, you can see it on your face, but really oftentimes it's just a surface emotion. There's something underneath that. And I think it partly has to do with us trying to suppress or control our emotions. And so like we were made to feel, like we were made to experience a full range of emotions, and all of those are okay. And we've got to just like change that narrative that's out there in, American culture that says, men don't feel these emotions. Yes, they do. And we need to feel them so that it doesn't just get bottled up, like you were saying, and come out as this like surface emotion called anger.
And I'm thinking about like just even events recently, right? Like, if people are watching this on YouTube, they might see like my camera's not working right now, right? Like it's super choppy. There was just a number of things earlier today that it's like, man, just technology's not been working for me today, right? And it's made me mad. Like I'm just angry, I'm like, work the way you're supposed to work. And, earlier today, my wife was like, did I do something wrong? Are you upset with me? And I'm like, it has nothing to do with you. It's like the computer, the phones, the wires, like none of it's working right. And I've learned and gotten to a point personally, and it's had great impacts on my marriage, I think, where it's like, I'm an Enneagram 8. We've talked about Enneagram stuff a little bit, I think. And for that, like my greatest fear is vulnerability. But I've learned that, man, it's like the greatest way to build a bond, a bridge with someone is by being vulnerable. And 100%. So it's like I've had to train myself to be vulnerable, especially with my wife. And now it's like, man, she used to have to dig at me to get what I was thinking and feeling. And now it's like, man, if I'm not ready to talk about it, I won't talk about it. She won't press me for it. But then it's like an hour later, I'll come in, I'll be like, okay, here's what's wrong. And I'll just like download on her. And then as a 9, she like appreciates greatly, as an Enneagram 9, like appreciates greatly that like I'm trusting her with all that. But it's like, man, I'm just thinking through everything you said, where it's like, man, that anger's not brewing up. It's like I hold on to it long enough to process my thoughts so that I can verbalize them to her. But then it's like, man, it's like, and it might not be anything that she did that made me angry per se, but it's like, hey, just things that are impacting our household because of how they're impacting me, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, man, that vulnerability, just as men, I think we really need to dive deeper into that.
100% we do. I mean, the social science, from Brene Brown has shown us that the key to human connection is vulnerability. And if we want to have good relationships, we're going to have to be vulnerable. And that doesn't mean that we're vulnerable with everybody, but finding the right people to be vulnerable with, and certainly our wives or our spouses that has to be somebody that we're vulnerable with. Otherwise, how are they going to know us? How are they going to feel connected to us? How are we going to feel connected to them? So there's this sense
Mm,
of when we put ourselves out there and we're vulnerable and we don't know how the person's going to react, like that's really scary. But I'll tell you, Kevin, one of the best feelings in the world, I think, is when you do that and you just lay it out there with somebody and then they accept you anyways. That is one of the best feelings in the world, man.
it
And
is.
we've got to really work on that as guys. I think maybe you could even link this in the show notes, but I ran across this data that showed the decline of friendships in the last 20 years. And it says for men, so 20 years ago, it says, I'm reading it here now, that there was about, let's see, 4 to 5% that had no close friends or one close friend 20 years ago. Guess what it
Mm,
is today? 21% either have no close friends or one close friend. That's men
wow.
in the United States. So we we're relational people. Like you probably know that stereotype of like the dads that just like as they get older they have no friends. Like that's kind of a stereotype that's out
Yeah.
there. We've got to change that, man. We've got to change that, and I think vulnerability is one of the big keys.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, when you do lay it all out there, like you said, and you're accepted anyway, like there isn't a greater feeling than that. And, it's like I've been
Hmm.
with my wife long enough to know that like whatever I lay out there to her, she's going to accept me, and it's like, and
Hmm.
I got a couple really close guy friends too that it's like, man, it's like I could bring anything to them and they'll help me figure it out, and they'll be a support and they'll
Hmm.
accept me anyway. And it's all just, reflection of the greatest friend in Jesus that, it's like, and he knows, we don't even have to lay it out to him. It's like, he knows and he loves us and accepts
Yep.
us and died for us anyway, and it's like, man, you could always just come back to that one. And it's like, wow, dude, like, and so every time we do this though, and we lay it out to another human and they accept us, man, I think it just paints an even stronger picture of God's love for us too.
For sure, for sure, and I think there's healing in that. I mean, in
Mm,
James it talks about confessing your sins to one another so that you may be healed. So this idea of like talking about our struggles with another person, and that doesn't forgive us. From our viewpoint as Christians, like forgiveness for our sins comes from Jesus. So that's not the purpose of confessing our sins to one another, but it's part of the healing
mm,
process for us so that we can move past that, so that we can grow, so that we can get better. Because I'll tell you what, man, when you make a bad mistake, that lives with you for a little while.
yeah,
And by confessing it to somebody and them accepting you anyways and walking through that with you, man, it makes that healing process from that mistake so much easier.
absolutely. And it's really hard to find that healing just between you and God.
Yeah.
And it's not that, like you said, like God's the one that does the forgiving, but man, it's like, I think God gives us other people. He gives us the church, the community, so that we can experience some of these things,
Yeah.
and seeing other broken people accept and forgive us as we accept and forgive them is just a picture of heaven to me. So obviously we're Christians, we're former youth pastors, both of us.
Yep.
But one of the 6 domains is spiritual health. And for you and me, that can be pretty clear cut. But there might be people listening from different religious backgrounds or no religious background at all. And maybe it's not that they are atheists per se. It's just like they just don't think about God. They don't care,
Yeah.
to put
Yeah.
it simply. How does spiritual health look for them?
Yeah. That's a great question, Kevin. Essentially, our spiritual health is about understanding our relationship with the God is what we would say as Christians. But if you're not
Hmm.
following, any God, then it's really about your relationship with the world at large. So it's
Okay.
about seeing yourself part of the world at large. And it's about, secondly, your relationship with yourself. And then thirdly, that community that reinforces your identity. That's the spiritual component of your health. So what's your relationship look like, with the world at large, with yourself, and with the community that is centered around reinforcing your identity as a person? So, I
Mm.
mean, we we probably all have friends based off of like our hobbies, right? And those are great,
Sure.
but we have to have a community that's bigger than that from a spiritual standpoint. We need a community that reinforces our identity, who we are, what we stand for, what we believe. It can't just be about football or golf or whatever our hobby is.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, all right. One of the ones that seems a little different, and you've already touched on this, but is the vocational health piece, right? Because
Hmm.
all the other five you could kind of see as like an internal, personal thing, whereas the vocational is kind of an outside thing.
Yep.
But it's like, you get up, you go to work, or you work from home, whatever it might be. And obviously, I think the millennial generation in particular is just so fed up with toxic work environments that they're
Hmm.
just quitting, right? And like the great resignation is a thing
Hmm.
where there's never been more open jobs on the market than there's been in like the last year or two. And I think COVID fueled that a little bit, but I also think, this generation is just, they're just not willing to put up with that.
Hmm.
And it's, studies are showing people are willing to take less money. At least millennials are willing to take a lower paying job if it's something they enjoy.
Yeah.
And so there's all this talk about a toxic work environment, right? But like you still have to pay the bills somehow. You have to put food on the
Hmm.
table, especially if you have kids at home, right? It's like you have to put food on the table, keep the lights on, put food on their back or clothes on their back as they outgrow them every 3 months. Like, can that domain, the vocational domain, can it be healthy even in an unhealthy work environment?
Yeah, Kevin, I think that every person's tolerance to toxicity is going to be a little bit different, or even what's toxic for some might not feel toxic for others.
Mm.
So I think there's, some variance in those. I mean, there are some things that are just like clear cut, like if it's abusive at work, like that's going to impact everybody,
Sure.
Um, but if it is, a little bit, it can get a little bit more nuanced depending on the person and what's toxic for them. But what I'm seeing as I, like look at some of the, social psychology and organizational psychology that's out there, as I talk to leaders around the country, is that if you stay in a toxic work environment for long, and that's kind of going back to that analogy of the knee earlier,
Hmm.
if you stay in that for long, then it is going to impact you. And so, that doesn't mean that you need to bail on your job, but there are probably some steps that you need to take at work to try to make the environment a little bit better of a work environment for you so that you can maintain your vocational health. But I get it. If you are, if your job is, at the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, at your employer, you may feel like your hands are tied to impact too much. But I can tell you, everybody can do something. You can have a conversation. You can take steps. You can put in boundaries for yourself to protect yourself so that it's not impacting you as much. But if you try to just say like, well, this is just how it is, I'm going to try to just suck it up and continue on in this, it's going to impact you eventually. So I think it's really important for us to keep a pulse on this one. If you find yourself in a toxic work environment, you really need to be paying attention. because it is going to bleed into other parts of your life if it's not addressed to some degree.
You mentioned there was a couple of things people could do if they're in a toxic work environment. You mentioned there was a couple things that they could do to kind of make it better. Like, do you have any examples of, like, hey, quitting's not really an option right now. Like, what can I do so that I can be as healthy as I can vocationally, even if it's not the best environment?
Yeah. Well, there are different things you can do. And to kind of maybe like give some context to how I would answer this, there are really kind of like, there's so many different definitions of what toxic work culture looks like or what it is, that it's really hard sometimes to narrow it down. But I really liked how a group from MIT Sloan Management Review, that's a leadership journal that comes out of MIT, a group from there, they really tried to understand and define what is toxic. And so what they did is they reviewed thousands of Glassdoor reviews, and they narrowed it down to 5 things. So it's disrespectful, it's non-inclusive, it's unethical, it's cutthroat, and it's abusive. Okay, so those are the 5 things that they say that's toxic. So just if that's our definition, which I really like their definition, I think that paints a really clear picture of what's toxic and what's maybe just more preferential, is it helps us to understand then what we can do. So like if it's disrespectful, let's take that one as an example. So let's say that you have a coworker that is disrespectful to you in meetings all the time. Well, how not to respond to that is blowing up in the meeting, right? But what you can do is you can have a crucial conversation with that coworker offline, one-on-one. You kind of get them and you have a conversation and you say like, hey, in that meeting, you said this, that made me feel this way. Why did you do that? So the whole goal, you're trying to get more understanding of what's going on there. They'll tell you their, explanation. Oftentimes people are like, oh, sorry, I didn't know, and then boom, like all of a sudden that gets better. Sometimes it's like, well, it's because you deserve it. And maybe that person really is a jerk. And so then that your action step is, oh, I need to put up a boundary with that person. Okay. You need to say like, please don't do that in the meetings. It's disrespectful. If you don't listen to my boundary, then we're going to have more conversations. And that might include HR, or that might include our boss, or whoever it may be. So there's certain steps that you can take to really impact that situation and to try to make the work environment less toxic for you.
And I love narrowing it down to those 5 areas. Understanding more about what the problem is will help you fix it, instead of like, oh, he's being mean to me. Well, what is he 100%. Doing to be mean to you? I love that. So, all right, we're in wrapping up in this. All of these areas, all 6 areas, impact who we are as a person, right? How does that play in at home, right? This is a podcast on winning in marriage and parenting, right? Like, how does that? Oh man! And it's clear. It's kind of clear, but also like the ramifications, I just feel like, are so huge for how it can impact us as husbands and fathers, right? Like, how do you see that at play, though?
Oh man, it's huge. It really is huge. So, obviously, I'm doing this as a leadership coach, but if you're a dad, if you're a husband, you are leading at home. Okay. You may not be leading in every area at home, but you are leading at home. All right. And it is so important that you are healthy, because, those people that you are at home with, your spouse, your kids, those are the most important relationships in your life. Okay. So if you don't manage your health for the sake of those relationships, that's going to lead you down a pretty isolated and lonely life. And so that is not the picture I think that most guys have. They don't want to picture themselves as like a 75-year-old that has no relationship with their kids, and their wife left them years ago and they have no friends and they hate their job. Like, that is not the life that any of us wants. But
Yeah.
what happens is, if we don't pay attention now and we don't prioritize our health in our life now, then that's what's going to happen. That's the outcome that will happen. So it's really, really important that we focus on this at an early part of our life, early stage of our life, that we focus on this. And particularly when we are in that stage of life where you've got kids in the house and it seems like everything's crazy and you got no time for anything, like, that is one of the most important times for us to focus on.
I feel like you're
our
talking to me.
holistic health.
I feel like you're talking to me.
I mean, but it's true. I'm talking to you as much as I'm talking to myself, because I'm right in the thick of it too. Just because I've got, 3 older kids, I've still got a 4-year-old that's, we're having all those 4-year-old great challenges with, like, not sleeping. And like yesterday morning, I woke up and she's like literally breathing in my face. That's how she woke me up. Because she was just standing at the edge of the bed. So yeah, we're there, and we're at that stage where we're running around, it feels like, and I'm just like a daddy Uber driver these days. That's literally what I feel like. So it feels like there's no time. But the reality is, we have time for what's most important for us, and we need to prioritize our health, because those little kids and that spouse, they're counting on us. We don't get do-overs. We don't get to have those kids graduate and leave the house and be like, all right, let's press reset here and go back to when they were like 3 and I'll do over. We get one shot.
Yeah.
One shot. And we've got to get it right, because those relationships are the most important relationships in our lives, other than God, for us as Christ followers.
Yeah. That's so rich. And, and that's part of what, in the kickoff episode, I talked about one of the things was, spending that quality time with your kids, but the other was taking care of yourself, doing something for yourself. And for me, and I've noticed in these 6 domains, there's, one in particular, the physical one, almost as a check for all of them, right? Like, for me, if I'm doing well in there, usually all 6 of them are doing well. If I'm suffering there, usually all 6 of them are, like, it almost like things come and go with that. And so I think like it's important to check in on these things. And so if someone's looking at this and they're like, hey, maybe they have a glaring thing where they're like, there's 1 or 2 or 3 of these where I'm like, oh, dude, I'm doing great in these 3, but like these 3 over here, I'm really struggling with. Or maybe there's 1 or 2. How does one go about trying to get into the healthiest place, right? Like, if they're like, hey, I'm doing great physically, my other 5 are crap right now. Like, do they just jump in trying to fix all 5 of those at once? Like, what's the best way to go about trying to get into a healthier place as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's 3 things that I would suggest for anybody that's in that boat. First of all, you've got to understand where you're at. Like, if you don't have a clue where you're at, then you're never going to get to where you want to go. It's just like the Maps app on our phone. Like, the very first thing that it does is it orients to where we're at geographically, so that then it can figure out how to take us where we want to go. If we don't know where we're at, we can't ever get to where we want to go. And so we've got to really understand, where am I really? Where am I? And I've created a free assessment tool to help leaders to gauge where they're at in their holistic health. And you can actually find that on my website. It's free. It's at n8leader.com. You can maybe put it in the show notes, Kevin.
Yeah, we'll link that for sure.
It's a great, awesome. Thank you. Really, that tool is designed to help you to just really figure out where you're at, but then also to reassess later, because this isn't a I get to the destination and my health is good. Like we've got to always really come back and gauge where we're at any time. So it's good for us to have those check-ins. So the first one, you got to understand where you're at. Second one is once you get an idea where you're at, then you need to figure out like what is your plan to attack those areas. So maybe you are deficient or you feel you're lower with your physical health. Well, what are some things that you can do practically, realistically to grow in that? And we do need to be realistic with those things. They need to be achievable steps we can take, because if like, with our physical health, if it's like, oh, well, I want to lose, 75 pounds. Well, you have to really go like, is that realistic? For me to lose 75 pounds, that's not realistic. So
Right.
We have to be really realistic with these, but we have to chart a plan for what are the things that we're going to do. It has to be very clear. I recommend people write it out, that they share it with people that are going to help hold them accountable to it, because even though it's realistic, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. Any growth is going to be challenging. That's just the nature of growth. But then after you get the plan, and I think that's where most people stop, is they get the plan and they just like try to like muscle their way through it. You need to take the next step, which is you have to build the systems and you have to have the right tools and create the right environment where you're able to easily live out the plan consistently.
That's great.
So, like for me, with just as an example of this, with my when I started my fitness journey, like I don't know, probably 8 years or so ago, I was really overweight. I had like the third chin thing going on. My kids would rub my belly and be like, "Daddy's having a baby," like legit.
Oh,
and I was like, "Man, this
that'll
is
get
cool.
you right there. That'll cause you to get into shape."
So I talked to a friend of mine who had run for like 1,200 days in a row. And I was like, how did you do that? And he talked to me, about mindset and, all that stuff. But the thing that was most profound in that conversation is this very thing. He said, I had the mindset that I was going to run every day. It wasn't if, it's going to happen every day. And he said, I would carry my running gear in the car with me everywhere that I went. So that when I got the moment, maybe it was like in between meetings, he would put his running gear on and he would go get the run in real quick. And I was like, oh, like it like clicked for me, is that all of the systems, all of the right tools and the right environments are critical to making sure that we're successful with our plan. So, it's no different than like if you are an alcoholic, as an example, and you want to stop drinking alcohol, well, you shouldn't go to a bar. You shouldn't go to a liquor store. Yeah. You shouldn't have alcohol bottles in your house. Like we get that, but we have to kind of take that same approach for these areas that we want to take growth in, is that we need to get the right systems, the right tools, and the right environments.
And sometimes that does the work for us. Like when I get to the gym, I never have a problem putting the work in. The hardest battle is always getting there. Especially on the hard days when it's like the kids have been at me all day. It's like the hardest part is getting them to bed and then getting out to the garage where my home gym is. But once I'm there, dude, it's the system's in place. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm attacking, and I go for it. And so I love you say build the systems. Because the systems are there, man. It can lead to that so much easier. It's like the people that they lay out their workout clothes the night before so they go to the gym in the morning, man, I love those steps there. Well, dude, thank you so much this has been like really rich, even just for me, even if no one else listens to it. Like it's just been rich for me. Just being able to hear your heart and passion for it clearly. Is there any other resources that you recommend as we're about to sign off? Is there any other things you'd recommend people checking out? We'll link some of the stuff you were talking about in the show notes. But anything else that you'd like to recommend to people?
Oh man, I mean, there's just so many things that I could say because I'm that nerd that likes to learn.
That's why I have to ask you about.
Yeah. But like with what we were just talking about like systems, environments, and tools, really good helpful resources, Atomic Habits by James Clear. When we talk about, like I mentioned it earlier, those relational needs, there's a book called People Fuel by John Townsend, and he really like unpacks what those relational needs are that we all have, and the whole process of how we get those needs met, and the people that like give those, fulfill those needs, and the people that kind of like take nutrients out of us. That's a really helpful book. If you're struggling with the relational health, there's so many good resources. That I mentioned the Brene Brown stuff about vulnerability. Her TED Talk that's on YouTube. I think it's the most viewed TED Talk of all time, about how vulnerability is the key to connection. It is. If you haven't seen that, you need to watch that. It's just very, very, very good. But there's a lot of things that I can mention. Certainly, if I can be a resource to any of you, you can find me at n8leader.com as well.
Awesome. Well, Nate, dude, thank you so much for giving us some of your time and sharing some of your wisdom and insight with us. And I think people are going to benefit from it.
Hey, it has been a pleasure, Kevin. Excited to be here, and I'm excited to continue to follow what you're doing because as guys, as husbands, as fathers, we need this. And so thank you so much for creating this podcast.
Well, I hope you were informed, encouraged, and inspired by that. And I know I was challenged by it too. And I want to just add, man, like that relational health that he talked about. If you don't have some deep friendships, some real friendships with some other guys, man, make that a goal. Make that a goal to develop those deep friendships. I got a couple bros that I know I can count on for anything. And it makes all the difference in the world. Literally can be life-changing to have those friendships, those relationships as a part of your life. Well, hey, however you're watching and listening, give us 5 stars, hit that thumbs up, leave us a comment and review. That really helps us as we're getting this thing going. And as always, if you aren't following us on Instagram yet, at Kicks and Minivans, make sure to hop on there with us. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your family.